The hunt for the Nazi regime's most brutal criminals began in the immediate aftermath of World War II. For many of these, the only acceptable sentence was death. The primary architects of the atrocities, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Goebbels, and Heinrich Himmler, evaded justice by committing suicide before they could be held accountable for their crimes. But thousands of Nazi soldiers and officials guilty of war crimes, carrying out or organizing atrocities during the war, were tried and executed. Here are their stories. The most common form of execution was hanging, though different forms were used by different nations. Most military executions of the time used a firing squad, but the decision was made to execute them by hanging as common criminals and not as soldiers. The simplest form of hanging, used by the United States during the Nuremberg Trial executions, was the short drop method. This was the most basic form of hanging and usually resulted in death by strangulation, as the noose suffocated the condemned prisoner. The British, on the other hand, used the long drop. This method was more complex and used the victim's height and weight to calculate the necessary distance of the drop, helping to ensure instant death by internally severing the neck. The hangman. American Master Sergeant John C. Woods was the principal hangman of the Nuremberg executions, along with his assistant, Joseph Malta. Woods had volunteered for the role of Army executioner before the D-Day invasion of June 1944. The Army was looking for someone with experience of hanging, which Woods claimed to have. But this was a lie. He claimed to have worked as a hangman in both Texas and Oklahoma, but no hangings had occurred in those states during his adult life. In 1929, he had also been diagnosed with the constitutional psychopathic inferiority, whose symptoms included criminality, emotional instability, and paranoia. Many of his hangings were painful, lengthy affairs, with some men taking almost half an hour to die. Though whether these mistakes were deliberate or accidental is unknown. According to the American military magazine Stag, in an article published some months after the executions, Woods deliberately used too short a rope and built the trapdoor too small to inflict as much pain on his victims as possible. While one witness to the execution claimed that Woods was not bothered at all when the executions did not go to plan. After the executions, Woods declared, "I hanged those 10 Nazis, and I am proud of it." Still serving as an Army combat engineer, he died in 1950 after electrocuting himself. Nuremberg. The worst Nazi criminals, such as Goering and Ribbentrop, were tried at the Nuremberg War Crimes Trial. Nuremberg is the most famous post-war trial, in which the uppermost echelons of the Nazi organization were charged. Of 24 indictments on charges of war crimes, 13 were sentenced to death, 11 of whom were executed by hanging on the 16th of October 1946, all within 90 minutes. Of the 2 that were not hung, Martin Bormann, private secretary to Adolf Hitler, was sentenced to absentia, as his whereabouts were unknown, though it was later discovered that he had died at the end of the war while trying to escape Berlin. Hermann Goering, head of the Luftwaffe and one of the most powerful Nazi officials, committed suicide the day before the executions with a concealed cyanide capsule. Joachim von Ribbentrop was the German Minister of Foreign Affairs who was responsible for brokering the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, and the Pact of Steel, an alliance with the Italian fascists. He was convicted for his role in the Holocaust, as he encouraged German authorities in occupied nations to transport Jews and other undesirables to the Nazi concentration camps for forced labor and extermination. He also encouraged the summary executions of downed Allied airmen and played a role in the annexation of Austria and the invasions of Czechoslovakia and Poland. He claimed in his trial that he'd never made an order himself and believed Hitler only wanted peace, but this defense was rejected. His execution was at 1:30 a.m. and was a lengthy procedure, as he hung for 14 minutes before finally dying of oxygen deprivation. Wilhelm Keitel was the next to be executed. He had served during the war as Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the overall commander of the German army. The evidence for his crimes came from his signature, which was found on dozens of illegal orders, calling for the execution of prisoners of war and political prisoners. He did not deny his actions and admitted to knowing these orders were illegal, but he believed that, as a soldier, he was only following orders, and so was exempt from responsibility. He wished to die as a soldier, so requested death by firing squad. This was refused, and he was hung. He suffered a wound to his head as he fell, hitting his head on the trap door, only dying after 24 minutes of strangulation. Ernst Kaltenbrunner was a native Austrian, but supported the Anschluss, the German annexation of Austria. As a member of the Austrian Nazi Party and SS, he assisted in the takeover, providing intelligence to German officials in Bavaria. He played a large role in the Nazification of Austrian society and helped establish the country's first concentration camp, Mauthausen, in 1938. In 1943, during an inspection of Mauthausen camp, he ordered 15 prisoners to be selected to demonstrate to him the different methods of execution. He was found not guilty of crimes against peace, but guilty of crimes against humanity, and executed at 1:52 a.m., only 8 minutes after Keitel. Alfred Rosenberg was an ethnic German, but had been born and raised in Tallinn, Estonia, then a part of the Russian Empire. He was a devoted Nazi ideologue and played a large role in forming official Nazi racial and religious theories. Rosenberg, while not a military man, strongly influenced Hitler's ideas of Germanic supremacy. The Nuremberg Trial concluded that he had been invaluable in the formation of Nazi beliefs, as well as playing a role in the invasion of Norway. He was executed 7 minutes after Kaltenbrunner, and was the only condemned man, when asked if he had any final words, to reply, no. Arthur Zeiss Inquart was the last of the convicted men to be hanged at 2:59 a.m. Another Austrian was an ally of the Austrian fascist Fatherland Front. He was a devotee to Heinrich Himmler's pseudo-historical racial ideas on the mythological origin of the supposed Aryan race, and personally funded expeditions to various parts of Asia in search of the original pure Aryan. He was appointed Minister of the Interior and personally sent the telegraph that began the German takeover of Austria. During the war, he was made Reich Kommissar of the occupied Netherlands, where he controlled the civil administrations, enacted Nazi policies, and personally signed at least 800 death warrants, though some put this figure as high as 1,500. During his trial, he denied any knowledge of war crimes and claimed to believe that the Jews were evacuated for their safety, as opposed to being sent to death camps. When sentenced to death, he said, "I never expected anything different. It's all right." By 2:59 a.m., all 11 men had been executed. The bodies, including that of Goering, were all photographed and labeled, and then stripped naked and placed into unadorned wooden coffins. The coffins were labeled with false names and disguised as the coffins of fallen American soldiers, with Goering's coffin being labeled as George Munger. The following day, the bodies were loaded into American trucks, guarded by American military police, and transported to a cemetery crematorium. The staff of the crematorium were ordered to burn the bodies, being told they were American soldiers. The ashes were loaded into urns, still labeled with their false American names, and again transported, this time to a makeshift American military mortuary in Munich, at the commandeered home of a local businessman. The ashes were then taken to a nearby river and dumped in, and the urns were destroyed. The men's possessions were also collected and disposed of in various ways. Keitel's wartime medals, including those from World War I, were all destroyed, and his field marshal's baton was smashed to pieces. His Nazi party badges were kept, but the swastikas on them were deliberately damaged and scratched. The party badges were then sold, helping to pay for the expensive executions. Goering's medals were also destroyed, except those which were valuable, such as the gold party badges and diamond-studded pilot's badge, which again had their Nazi symbolism destroyed and were sold for scrap. Some of Goering's medals that were not on him when he was captured were looted from his private trainer residence, with some still surviving today. All uniforms were collected and burned, while civilian possessions, such as jewelry and cash, up to 1,000 Reichsmarks, were returned to the deceased's relatives. Larger amounts of cash and more valuable jewelry were also sold. Personal papers such as letters and diary entries were collected and archived, though some disappeared or were damaged.